Hello and welcome back to another video. Recently, one of my old videos called 6 Tips to Stop FIFA 22 Career Mode Getting Boring became the most viewed video on my channel. So I've decided to do another 6 tips for a very similar topic. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, but if you haven't already seen the first one, make sure you click the card at the top right of the video right now. I don't want to waste anyone's time, so let's get straight into the tips. My first tip is restricting signings. Now, I did say something similar in the first video where I was saying restrict your signings to players below a certain overall, but this one is a bit more tough. Every single league on FIFA can be sort of organised by a couple of different demographics. They might have a certain age, they might be a certain percentage of each nationality, they might prefer tall players or strong players or really fast players. Every single league will have these kind of demographics. Nationality and age are probably the easiest to measure, but each league will have specific stats for each. There was a good Reddit thread I saw on FIFA careers about 3 weeks ago, which I've linked in the description below, so make sure you check it out. But from that, there's an infographic that says the Premier League's 40% English, the Championship is 55 to 65, depending on Championship and League 1, and then League 2 is 3/4 English. It's a common feature for most of the leagues on the infographic. The further down the leagues you go, the more domestic percentage you get in each team. So the tip here is to try and keep your squad realistic by limiting your players to sort of players that you would expect to actually be in that league. Of course, overall is a big factor, but I'm saying you should also take into account certain nationalities and the age of the players you're trying to sign. This might force you to take in a couple of worse players each transfer window who don't quite fit in with the squad, but this adds to the challenge because this happens thousands of times in every single transfer window in real life. But in FIFA, you will hardly ever take on the worst player. You'll go for the Brazilian who's 75 overall with £300 a week wages over an English player who's 62 overall, of course, because who wouldn't? There's such a big gap in quality. But if you're trying to keep it realistic, then go for the nationalities, go for the age, and make sure you're signing a realistic player for your FIFA career mode. My second tip is to investigate your team before starting the career mode. Before every single save with a team I'm not too familiar with, I make sure I check Wikipedia, I check Google News, and I search for them on sites like The Athletic and The Guardian. Usually a team will have at least one interesting article or something you need to know before you start off with the career mode. The club could be owned by someone of a certain nationality, for example. It could be that they're under an embargo in real life, and they shouldn't be signing players when you're using them on FIFA. It could even be a unique restriction you weren't aware of, something like Chivas having a policy that's very similar to Athletic Club with signing certain nationalities that I was not aware of until I started a career mode in Mexico. Usually I do try and include as many of these interesting facts about certain teams if I'm doing a team or a league guide, but if I haven't done the team or league, make sure you check out these sites for a bit more information. If you can't find something and you still want to play a certain club, then why not invent your own? Pretend that they were bought by a foreign owner. Maybe you're taking over a Polish Ekstraklasa team and you think they've got bought by someone from Finland, for example. Try and sign a bunch of Finnish players and bring them up to standard. You could pretend that they have an academy in an interesting country. In a recent video, I did mention the Right to Dream Academy in Ghana, which really does feed Nordsjælland in Denmark. If you're playing again in Poland, maybe why don't they say they have an academy in Japan? See if you can bring through a bunch of good young Japanese players. You could even pretend they're in huge debt so that you can't sign any players. You could come up with some full season-long storyline objectives that you could have some certain goals you need to fulfill around these restrictions combined with the board objectives to give yourself a nice tough career mode. And I do think that would make everything a lot more interesting, so I do recommend you do it. My third tip is actually technically 3 tips around youth and the youth academy, so hopefully you'll learn something about those areas. So of course the youth academy can be very, very overpowered if you do choose to abuse it, but there is also other areas you can get good youth players from. Check the transfer list every now and then because quite a lot of the time as soon as a player hits 22 and they were on the loan list before, they get moved straight onto the transfer list because the AI decides they're not good enough. Of course once you've developed a 22-year-old because they can still hit their potential up until around the age of 33, then you can sell them on for a lot more money than you signed them for. This could make it a little bit more interesting. Maybe instead of doing your youth academy, you can just sign these unwanted younger players from the transfer list. I think this would be fun, and it is kind of a bit more realistic. Only 1 or 2 players each season would actually move from the youth academy to the first team, but on FIFA, of course, you can bunch through 5 or 6 every single month. If you're trying to sign these younger players from the transfer list, not only will there be less, they'll cost you more because you'll be having to pay transfer fees, you'll have to scout them for a bit longer before, and you might actually be competing with AI teams. So I do recommend that you could do something like Brentford did in real life, get rid of your youth academy and just focus on signing these young unwanted players from the transfer list. If you're interested in this kind of thing, then do make sure you check out Brentford and the story of why they got rid of their academy. They figured out it would save a lot of money, and it's actually worked out pretty well, and they focused that money on signing good young players from lower leagues. Because of this, they've ended up in the Premier League, so why don't you give it a go on FIFA 22? A couple more tips coming up now, including using pre-season to experiment with your team and difficulty. I always think career mode is a bit more fun when it's a challenge. If you're playing on pre-season and you notice a player is really overpowered, for example, maybe you're in League 2 and you've got a player with 98 pace. He's going to score hundreds of goals if you play him in the right kind of way. Play him through through balls, he'll outrun every single player unless Mbappe is for some reason playing centre back for Lincoln City. You need to make sure you're not winning 9-0 every week, so maybe if you do have a player who's really overpowered, consider selling them or trading them for someone where it's a bit more of a challenge to score every single game. Cup games are another good way to experiment mid-season if a player might be overpowered if you get promoted, or if you want to change the difficulty without too much consequence. Because of course a cup game doesn't really matter as much as a league match, especially if you're a lower league team trying to get as far as you can. Another good thing to try and experiment with is sliders. If you're finding a certain thing easy or maybe a bit too difficult, why don't you try and adjust them in the sliders? If your players are too fast, then why don't you notch down your sprint speed or increase the AI's sprint speed a little bit instead? It would make it a bit more difficult and probably a bit more challenging, and therefore, honestly, a bit more realistic and definitely a bit more fun. So check out sliders and make sure you're on the right difficulty is my fourth tip. Moving on to tip 5, and that's don't get too attached to your players. If you want to keep it realistic, you'll be signing 2 or 3 players for your first team every season. However, you don't want to get too attached to the other 8 or 9 because you should be accepting bids if they're coming in from realistic teams, and you should be trying to avoid rebuilding your squad every single season. It's the total opposite direction though. If you're trying to sign 11 players every single season, you're never going to get too attached to the team, and honestly, I don't think you'll enjoy the career mode as much as if you did do it a bit slower and enjoyed your time in the lower leagues, because there are quite a few good, interesting teams in the lower leagues of Germany, in the low leagues of Spain, England, France. They've got good teams, but you might not play them if you're constantly getting 3 promotions and just ending up in the Premier League and constantly playing Watfords and Tottenhams and Manchester Uniteds. To make it a bit more clear, the tip is basically try and limit how many players you're turning over every single season. If you're trying to do maybe 5 a season, that could probably be kind of realistic. That is half your first team every single year. If you're doing 11, you're never going to get too attached. If you're only replacing 1 or 2, you are both risking your team getting overpowered because of dynamic potential, but also you're not going to experience quite as many good players who are possibly going to be able to provide for you in the lower leagues. So do try and make sure you keep it at a standard rate. And my final tip in this video is to give different leagues a go. You don't always have to play in England or in Germany, France or Spain. There are literally hundreds of teams on this game. While a few of them might be in unplayable leagues, you've still probably got around 30 different leagues that are not the big 5 that you could give a go. Why not try out a Portugal or a Denmark, a Norway or a Sweden? They have some very interesting teams. A lot of the teams have good history. Some of them even got pretty far into Europe in the past. Why not see if you can get Malmo to actually win the Champions League final? When they got there in the past, they lost. See if you can get them to win it this time. Why not see if you can get Rapid Bucharesti their second Champions League? Things like that are more interesting, in my opinion, than winning a 20th title for Manchester United. Things like that. So do give different leagues a go. Of course, if you find any of these small leagues too easy, why not just create a club that's nowhere near good enough for the level? Give yourself no money and see if you can struggle to the top of football. It's all going to help you keep your career mode both more fun, you're going to get more longevity, and also, in my opinion, you're going to have a realistic time. Hopefully you've enjoyed these tips. If you have any of your own, feel free to leave them in the comments below because I love reading them, and I know everyone who watched this video would be very interested in seeing what you have to say. Thank you all for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Join the Discord, follow me on Twitter, like the video, subscribe, all that normal stuff. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Cheers and goodbye.